We find ourselves in the fourth week of our sermon series on hymns this morning, this very hot, humid July morning. That final stanza of Psalm 52, which speaks about being like a green olive tree in the house of God, fills me with so much longing that God had made me a tree instead of a person today. I know I would love to be a tree on the bank of a river on a sunny, hot day like this. I don't know about you. And while we might dream of cooler weather and gentler climates in the heart of summer, this is not what the psalmist writes about for us to explore. The writer of the psalm is addressing someone named Doeg the Edomite, a man who led a military action against 85 priests and their families, killing all of them by the order of King Saul, the first king of Israel. Doeg tells King Saul that David, the prophesied soon-to-be king of Israel, that David has taken shelter in the home of a priest who sympathizes with him, a priest by the name of Achimelech. After Doeg tells Saul that he has found David, he commands Doeg to commit a terrible act. He commands Doeg to kill this priest, dozens of other priests in that town, their wives and children and livestock in that city. Doeg does this for King Saul, ultimately killing 85 priests and their families because they are hiding King David. The psalm begins by directly addressing him, asking, "Why do you boast, O mighty one, of mischief done against the godly?" After grieving the senseless violence that he and his followers commit, the writer then warns them that goodness will eventually defeat them. The psalmist describes the actions of God, a God who protects and fights for the very people that Doeg and Saul oppress. Now, both the reading that Andrew did earlier from Amos and this psalm may be entirely off-putting for some of us because of its explicitly vengeful and retaliatory language. It is true that words like this in Amos and the Psalms give justification to oppression. One of the most common reasons why I hear from people explaining they cannot believe in God is because of passages like these. Something like these questions may come out of their mouth, and they may sound familiar to you. Why is God so violent in the Bible? And why do people use God's name to justify violence in the first place? I could never believe in an angry, violent God. I want to challenge us this morning to consider something else. An image of the oppressed saying and hearing these words, not the oppressor saying and hearing these words. Damon Garcia, practical theologian, argues that there is another image of vengefulness that doesn't justify oppression, but empowers liberation. It can be easy to dismiss this kind of language in the Psalms and the prophets if we have never been oppressed, if we have never had our livelihoods or our neighborhoods or our personhood systematically torn apart. If you find yourself in a position where you do not need to liberate yourself from subjugation or maltreatment based on your social location, then these types of psalms and these kinds of prophecies may fall flat or feel entirely foreign to you. But for a moment, I would like you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine a time that someone has wronged a person that you love. Imagine what that felt like in your body when you learned that something terrible and unjust happened to your loved one. What emotions come up for you as you imagine this moment? What thoughts rise to the top of your mind? How do you imagine responding to support this loved one? What words do you say to comfort them? What do you imagine saying or doing to the person who harmed someone you love? I'd like you to come back now to the present with me and to this text. Now I want you to imagine that you are a parent and someone has harmed your child. This is a better place to begin as we think about this psalm and its portrayal of God's vengeance. We find that kind of imagery too in the prophets in the book of Hosea. In chapter 13 of Hosea, Hosea describes God as a mother bear who, robbed of her cubs, attacks the kidnappers and then rips out their hearts. This is really in there. I'm not making this up. This is the kind of God that the psalm writer is thinking about when they pen the following line. God will break you down forever. God will snatch and tear you from your tent. God will uproot you from the land of the living. This is the kind of justice-based vengeance, a righteous anger that gives favor to and stands up for the oppressed. This is not a battle hymn. This is a liberation hymn. God does not condone the violence committed by King Saul and Doeg. God and the psalmist clearly condemn it. God protects God's people from further harm. God does not cause that harm. In a beautiful image, the psalm ends with this green olive tree, a vision of deep roots, a strong trunk, confident branches stretching towards the sky, abundant fruit growing on its limbs. This is the kind of person who will withstand all sorts of attempts to discourage or dissuade or destroy them. They will not be moved. They will stand tall and take courage and trust in God. The olive tree is a powerful symbol in Judaism. Olive oil lit the lamps in the temple, and it is said to be a symbol of light for the world, according to Midrash Tanchuma. To refer to oneself as an olive tree is a bold and powerful statement. Olive trees remain green year-round, and they can last for thousands of years. My parents had olive trees on our ranch in California growing up. I imagine now, long after the house I grew up in no longer exists, those olive trees will still be there growing in the Sierra Nevada foothills, rooted deeply into the soil, standing the test of time. The psalmist says that we, as God followers, are like those olive trees, always green, never moving, strong, full of life, thriving against the odds. This kind of strength and connection to God in the face of adversity relates directly to our hymn for this morning, "It Is Well With My Soul." The psalm writer and the hymn writer had both experienced and known deep loss and senseless tragedy. In the early 1880s, Horatio Spafford, a successful Chicago lawyer and Presbyterian layman, sent his 4 daughters and his wife ahead of him to cross the Atlantic Ocean by boat while he was detained on business. They were bound for a vacation in Europe, and he insisted that he would join them in a few days in Paris. In the middle of the night, another boat crossing the Atlantic crashed into the boat, carrying his wife and daughters. All 4 of the daughters died in that boat accident, and only his wife survived. Horatio, distraught, embarks on a transatlantic journey to join his grieving wife as she waits for him in Paris. He wrote the words as a poem to express his grief on that ship. He did not know at the time it would become a classic hymn reprinted in thousands of hymnals around the world. The refrain of the hymn reminds me of the psalmist's lines about being like an olive tree. The refrain goes, it is well with my soul. This refrain echoes through his poem, through our hearts, and in our ears. No matter what happens, he writes, it is well with my soul. An astonishing statement to make any day of the week. But imagine making this statement after losing your 4 children and being able to say this. What rock-solid, stalwart faith it would take to say and believe this. In my more doubtful moments, I wonder if he wrote this line aspirationally, perhaps as a way to bring this kind of belief into being inside of himself, wanting it to be true. I'm reminded of the father asking for healing for his child in Mark 9, who cries out to God, I believe, help my unbelief. Don't we all express something like this at some point or another in our spiritual lives? I wonder if this prayer poem that Horatio wrote during his personal dark night of the soul came from a similar place as the Father's cry for belief in Mark 9. Or a similar place as the psalmist who writes about the vengeance of God and the solidity of their faith after the massacre of these priests and their families. Whatever it was that inspired Horatio to pen these words, I am so grateful that he did. I am grateful because these words, it is well with my soul, can be a balm to the spirit in times of sorrow and loss. They can be a prayer you repeat to yourself no matter how you feel, no matter how lost or afraid you may be. They can be words you cannot sing right now because they do not feel true. The pain is too strong, the grief is too real, the loss is too much. I want you to take a minute and look at the person next to you, or behind you, or in front of you, or if you are on Zoom, the person you're worshiping with, or imagine the person that you rely on. These are the people who will sing these words for you when you can't. These are the people who will pray these words for you when you can't. And these are the people who will believe these words when you are unable to believe them yourself. The community that you see and feel around you, they are with you. They are the olive trees in your life when you cannot and do not feel like an olive tree. And you may be an olive tree for someone else, someone you may not even realize needs you to be an olive tree for them. As we sing, It Is Well With My Soul, I'd like you to imagine yourself as that olive tree in Psalm 52, tall and strong, unmovable, standing the test of time, lighting the temple of God with your gifts, providing shade and sustenance for the people you love. Whatever our lot, God has taught us to say, it is well with our souls. May it be so. Amen.